Good day to you, wherever you're watching from. Welcome to Kathy Mole Ministries. This morning, or today, I'm going to be speaking to you about, this is the first in a couple of videos I'm going to be doing, things people want but they can't seem to get. And I think as we go into the session, you'll get an understanding of where I'm coming from. So today I'm going to speak to you about purpose and calling. There are so many people that I've come across over the years who say, I believe I'm called to do this. I know that my purpose is this and that, but they never seem to do it or get there. And I remember when I was newly saved and involved in the things of the church that I knew I was called, but I would see other people who had been called to do the same things that I felt that Rory and myself were called to do, but they were doing it. And it just seemed to be effortless, and they had favor, and doors opened for them, and things happened. And we were just still sitting and waiting. And we all know that there's always a waiting time when it comes to your calling. There's an appointment where God says, this is what I've appointed you to do. This is your purpose. There's an assignment that comes, specific instructions about where you're going to go, what you're going to do, who you're going to connect with. There are a whole lot of things that God gives you, and then there's an anointing to do it. But when it comes to your purpose and your calling, it's never just this way out there one day in whenever it's going to happen. There's some things that you need to recognize in your life and to recognize in the season that you're in that maybe it's time for you to step into something. And when I say calling, I'm not just talking about a calling to fivefold ministry. And when I say purpose, I'm not just talking about something you need to do actively, physically. So let's look at it. The first thing about a purpose and calling is when it's a calling from God, you cannot make it happen. Only God can. A lot of people have stepped out into areas, they've tried to do things because they thought it looked like they could do it or what they should do, but it never worked out because only God can make your calling and your purpose happen. And it's our cooperating with God that causes things to move and shift, and we start to walk in our calling and purpose. So how do you know that you are called to whatever you feel God has called you to do? It could be children's church. You feel that this is your calling and your purpose. It could be intercession. It could be an itinerant prophetic ministry where God has said you're going to go to the nations. So how do you know in your heart of hearts that this is what you're called to do? There must be a yes. When the devil throws things at you, when life throws things at you, when you don't see the thing happening and you still seem to be in the waiting mode or in the what if and when and who and how and why, there's always a yes that points you towards your calling in God and your purpose in God. Your yes is always bigger than your what if and your no and circumstances that are in opposition. So there must be a yes. Then, because of your yes, you learn to break through what I call the O's. There are going to be some O's thrown at you, and those are opposition, opinions, and obstacles. When those come against you, when your yes is, I know God has called me to this, you break through those things because God has given you the grace to break through those things. The opposition comes from the enemy, obviously. The opposition comes from the enemy in the form of intimidation. Even if it's a dream you've had and it's something you're trusting God for in the season, intimidation is going to come from the enemy as opposition to push you back and distract you from believing what God has for you. Then the opinions of other people. The woman with the issue of blood had to push through the crowds. And I'm sure there were people who looked at her and they would have known her in that neighborhood. And they would have thought, what is she doing out here? Who does she think she is? The opinions of people. It was blind Bartimaeus who was sitting on the side of the road shouting, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And the crowd laughed at him and told him to be quiet until Jesus said, bring him to me. So your opinion, the opinion that keeps you going is the opinion of God. Pleasing God, pleasing Jesus, hearing the voice of the Spirit is what keeps you going. If you have trouble continuing and focusing on your purpose and calling, when the opinions come, then maybe you need to take some time out and say, God, is this yes big enough for me? and the obstacles. There will be obstacles when it comes to your calling. Even when you're walking in your calling, life doesn't suddenly become a bed of roses. There are always obstacles in life. Don't have enough money. Don't have the proper transport. I don't have doors opening for me. These are all obstacles. But when there's a yes, and when there's a definite calling and purpose from God, God moves on your behalf. So the obstacles, it's like where there seems to be no way, God makes a way. He makes a road in the wilderness. And when you're walking in your purpose and your calling, these are things that God does. You don't have to go on Facebook and tell everybody what you're called to do. You never have to defend yourself. You don't have to answer to people when they question you, unless it's your leadership and you're going off track. Then it's okay. Be accountable to people. But you don't have to answer to people or get people's attention by going online and tagging 150 people because you're now online. You don't have to post photographs up of yourself every day so people remember who you are. God is very good at drawing people to you when he sees that they need what he has put inside of you as a gift. You don't have to go and advertise yourself. It's okay to market. I don't know if market's the right word. Post things up on Facebook and say, I'm going live, so people know you're going live, but you don't have to blast it all over the place and tag 100 nations to join your online sessions. As you can hear, that's just a little bit of a gripe that I have at the moment. People overselling themselves. None of my friends do that. Here's another way to recognize your purpose and calling, and this is an important one. Recognize specific spiritual awakenings or encounters that you had with God, because those things are God getting your attention and pointing you in a certain direction. This is a question you need to ask yourself. When did you remember God speaking to you, touching your life, meeting with you even as a child? Because back then, in your formative years, God already had his hand on you, and he already was beginning to get your attention, to keep you close to himself, because God is more aware of the distractions than we are. But I remember when I was growing up, my parents never went to church. They were not churchgoers. They weren't atheists. They believed in God. My dad came from a church background, religious background, and my mom not so much, but they knew about God, and they had a fear of God to a certain degree. But I was always drawn to going to church. My younger brother and I went to Sunday school together. Sometimes we did bunk on a Sunday, and we spent some time sitting in the bus stop and waiting for everybody to go home, and then we went back home and pretended we had been at Sunday school, and I've been forgiven for that already. But I always had this drawing to it was a place of comfort, and it became a familiar place to me to be around Christians. And even though I didn't know why, but when I think back, I know why. I joined a Bible study group that happened in our neighborhood when I was about 12 or 13, when all my friends were wanting to go to movies or parties. I was happy to walk up the road on my own and join in somebody's home cell Bible study group. And that's where the couple who headed up the group, I would love to find them. I don't know if they're still alive or whatever they're doing. And they laid hands on me and they prophesied over me. And back then I knew nothing about it. But I was always drawn to these things as a child. And I know that was God getting my attention, because I was called to be involved in church life and ministry life. I wanted to... I used to read magazines about going to missions. I used to have one sent to me once a month, and I couldn't wait for it. I signed up for a subscription. I used to go to a coffee bar on a Saturday evening in our neighborhood. That's where I got saved. And then also, I always had the drawing to be alone with God. And I knew nothing. I would have been about 14. And I wanted to go somewhere where I could be alone with God. So I would go on long walks up on the mountain area. And I was always drawn to the clouds, because I thought that's where God is. And I would have conversations with God. And I can't say that I ever heard his voice back then, but I was drawn to these things. And when I think back about it, there's something that God does in our lives Maybe you never had these experiences or this drawing when you were a child, but maybe today God is drawing you and He's saying, I've got a purpose for you. It could be that He's calling you to pray. You have this intense desire to get into the presence of God and to pray. And this is God getting your attention. In this season, it's time for you and I to find where God has placed us, how we're going to function, what we're going to do. Whether you're a housewife, whether you're a mother at home with your kids, whether you're a school teacher, whether you're called to ministry as I am, there's something that God has put in your hand and He's put in your heart to do. So take some time out, sit with God and say, God, what is my purpose in this season? Because the devil's trying to stop God's people rising up and stepping into their purpose and their calling in this season. So I want to say to you, don't be one of those people. You go to church faithfully every Sunday. You give your tithes, you sow your offerings, you pray for people. You may be part of the healing ministry team or the prophetic team, but you haven't stepped into the fullness of your calling. I'm telling you, the suddenlies are coming as God about to release His power, His glory upon His church, and people who have been hidden away for a long time in the waiting room. They've been waiting for a long time, saying, I feel as if I don't have a purpose anymore. I can't remember what my calling is. Today I've just given you very quickly a few pointers. Where are the times that God awakened you to something and He met with you and He spoke to you? Pick up the promises again. It's time to pick up those promises again and to walk in your calling and walk in authority and be bold about it. Because remember, you break through the O's, the opposition, the opinions, and the obstacles when the grace of God is upon you to do what He has called you to do in this season. So be encouraged with that.